Before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to tell you about our sponsor, which is the Great Courses Plus. This is what it looks like. It's an app on your phone right there. And this is the teaching company, the Great Courses that I've been a fan of and consumer of for many years. And before you had to, go online and purchase a course and take the entire course, and that's all you got. Now with the Great Courses Plus program, they have a subscription program. So if you subscribe, then you have access to hundreds of thousands of courses, and therefore tens of thousands of lectures. If you get tired of a course, just switch to another course. I do it all the time. I'll hit 2 or 3 or half a dozen lectures in a particular subject. I get bored, or I just want to try something different, and I'll switch to new one. So let's just see what pops up here, because they also are pretty current. So I hit that, and we get America's Long Struggle Against Slavery. Okay, it's pretty obvious why that's popped up now, as I'm recording this in the middle of the riots and looting and all that over the death of George Floyd. And so I touch on that, and then you get a list of the lectures to choose from: Understanding the Fight Against Slavery, The Origins of Slavery in the British Empire, The African Slave Trade, and so on and so forth, all the way down. Slavery and the War for Independence, the Haitian Revolution. It looks like there is 30 lectures ending in slavery by another name, probably slave labor, and fighting modern slavery. So I'm going to listen to a few of those. The deal is, if you go to their site, the Great Courses, greatcoursesplus.com/salon, you get a free trial, and as a listener of my podcast. So I recommend it. I consume their lectures all the time, along with audiobooks, so I recommend that you do that. Perfect time in this era of social isolation. So with that, thanks for the support from the greatcoursesplus.com/salon. My guest this week is Andrew Rader. His new book is Beyond the Known: How Exploration Created the Modern World and Will Take Us to the Stars. Love that cover. Andrew is a mission manager at SpaceX. How cool is that? He is a rocket scientist. And he works for Elon Musk, so that's super cool. He holds a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, specializing in long-duration spaceflight. Well, we get into that, what it takes to travel long distances of months or even years to the planets. In 2013, he won the Discovery Channel's competitive television series, Canada's Greatest Know-It-All. He's a Ken Jennings kind of Jeopardy guy, super smart, widely read. In fact, he just tried out for Jeopardy, so we'll see if he gets on that show. And so we talk about, the nature of human nature as explorers. Why did we leave Africa? Why have we colonized most of the earth and beyond? And to what extent do we just have this urge to go new places, or are we just kind of pushed for practical living reasons or economic reasons or whatever? So we get into all that. We do the whole history, which he does in his book on the history of exploration from out of Africa, Mediterranean, European exploration, age of exploration, and all that, all the way up to the 20th century, the space race, what it was all about, politics, of course, and then how we can get to Mars, how we're going to colonize Mars, and then how we can get to the outer planets, and how we can get to the nearest stars. These are really, really difficult problems, but this is what he does. So we also talk about the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? And are we living in a matrix? Anyway, kind of end with that. So if you appreciate the podcast, please give us some support at skeptic.com/donate or at Patreon. We do depend on your donations. It's part of the 501c3 nonprofit science education organization, Skeptic Society, that funds the podcast. So we appreciate your support. Thank you very much. And with that, I give you Andrew Rader. Oh, well, so congratulations on the book, Beyond the Known: How Exploration Created the Modern World and Will Take Us to the Stars. So you are a rocket scientist in a way.
Aerospace engineer, yeah.
Well, it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, it is. I think that people think, I guess it's not so much science these days as engineering, which actually in the book I draw a significant distinction between.
Yeah, what is that distinction?
Know how versus know why. So scientists want to understand why things work, and they're trying to test hypotheses and find answers to questions. And engineers don't really care about that. They just want things that work. So instead of kind of trying to develop theories, they just test. Engineering is completely based on testing hardware and seeing how it actually works in practice. And you don't necessarily have to know how to quantify something. So you don't need to be able to analyze it in advance, but you just have to know it works. So like when NASA, it was actually NACA, was the predecessor to NASA when they were developing airfoils for wings.
All right.
They didn't really have the theory of fluid dynamics down. So what they did is they just tested several thousand different variations and saw which ones worked the best. And then we used that. The same way rockets were developed.
That's interesting. Kevin Kelly just had a new piece out in Wired a couple of days ago about why we shouldn't worry about AI. He had several good arguments, one of which was it's not enough to just think about a problem to solve it. You actually have to experiment and try stuff. And that computers can't do that, but people can. Anyway, I just thought of that. It's kind of embodied cognition.
Well, in a sense, that's the scariest part about AI, because neural networks is basically learning. So it's trial and error. It's exactly engineering, actually. And that's why AI, I think, is a little scary, because the networks are all communicating with each other, and it's just trying millions of variations, billions of variations on things. And whatever works, it does. I mean, it's rewarded. And whatever doesn't, it doesn't work. But it's kind of like evolution, actually. Engineering is very similar to evolution by natural selection. Whatever works, you do, and whatever doesn't work, you don't do.
Right. Yeah, my friend Paul McCready, who founded AeroVironment in Pasadena, he was the guy that won the Kramer Prize for the first human-powered airplane. First, they had to do a figure eight, then he won a second prize for going across the English Channel. His motive was he had a loan he had to pay off, so it was kind of a financial motive. But he was a clever guy. But he was a glider, and no one had won the human-powered flight contest because they weren't basing it on nature. And as a glider, he knew that gliders are based on these gigantic wings, like huge birds with very lightweight bodies. And just as he was doing this in the 70s, things like Mylar and lightweight aluminum tubing was coming online. And so he could construct an airplane with a gigantic wingspan. And then he found the slightest, slimmest, leanest cyclist he could find that had really good endurance, Brian Allen, and stuck him in there and did it. But he was following nature because Paul was very into evolutionary theory. So he figured, well, birds have had millions of years to figure this out. So I'm just going to do what they do.
Yep, exactly. That's a big source of inspiration in engineering for sure. Bioengineering and yeah, lots of things. Yeah, nature's had, as you say, billions of years to figure things out. So we should do what they do.
Another point while we're on the AI thing that Kevin Kelly made was that, what do we mean by the word intelligence? It's like it's not like humans are more intelligent in terms of evolutionary perspectives than chimps or birds or even bacteria. We've all evolved for billions of years. So we're all equally evolved. So exactly what do you mean by intelligence? What's the scale, spectrum? Why is a chimpanzee that can survive in the wild, whereas you and I would be dead in 2 weeks, how are they less intelligent than us? These are evolved adaptations for sort of cognitive niches, Pinker calls them.
Well, certainly niches. I mean, obviously, I think I say in the book, a flu virus is just as evolved as you are, right? And quite possibly more successful, actually. I think when we say intelligence, we're talking about problem solving, is taking lots of different inputs and coming up with a solution to something. So I don't think you could say viruses do that. Even chimps are not as good at doing that as humans.
Yeah.
Now, so computers are dumb, but they're fast, right? So it's kind of like computers are able to like parallel process things, but humans sort of do like a serial process where we come up with it's also, and some of the computation is kind of behind the scenes with humans. So it's hard to say how we come up with answers to things, right? Like, how does that even happen?
Yeah.
But so the question is, well, we learn a lot of processes through the exact same means that AI does. So trial and error, like our motor skills are honed by trial and error. Like a baby doesn't know how to reach for a ball, and it only learns that by adjusting the gain factors in its muscles by, I missed the ball. Let's adjust to the left. It's like firing an artillery shell, and you're like a little bit more elevation, a bit more power. And so humans do learn things that way. And the question is, do humans learn exactly like a neural net, like just by trial and error and experience? So certain things we do, but it's unclear if there's what else there is to human intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeopardy's been advertising that they're having the 3 greatest champions of all time, James Holzhauer, Brad Rutter, and Ken Jennings, who I note did Ken endorse your blurb your book? Yeah. And then I tweeted that out and said, but there is one Jeopardy champion who's way ahead of all you guys. It's Watson.
Yep.
Now that's an AI, all right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of a dumb AI. I mean, Jeopardy is a smart show, but it's just grinding through Wikipedia pages, right?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for example, that's one thing that AI is really good at, is just finding, AI can solve problems when given a close-ended problem, right? Find the solution to X, solve mathematical problem 4, find the prime number, the millionth prime number, whatever it is. Actually, it's not particularly good at that. That's why quantum computing is here. But it's sort of like the messy, open-ended problems that humans are still better at. It's hard to say if AI will sort of overtake. It's more like, what is the question? Humans are sort of what is the question? Which is interesting from a Jeopardy perspective, because that's what
what it does. Yeah, but you are slightly worried about AI. I presume not the robo-apocalypse of the Terminator type scenario, but more along the lines of artificial general intelligence, just not even knowing how much smarter they are than us and run us into the ground or whatever.
Yeah, the thing that I kind of worry about is we're so reliant on computer networks these days, the internet for banking, communications, all our systems are sort of plugged into that. And an AI doesn't have to be killer robots. It could be hackers are easily able to break your codes and get into your bank accounts. That is kind of an AI apocalypse, right? And it could be humans in the loop. So it's just the tools may not be there for cryptography. I mean, usually like quantum computing, there's ways to actually create quantum keys that are unbreakable theoretically, but so there's that. But it's questionable whether the defense mechanisms against hacking will ever keep up, and AI assisted hacking. And that's the sort of thing that I'm really more worried about. The other thing is, it would probably be the small things that are scary. Like you always have the big Death Stars or the Star Destroyers or the giant, Arnold Schwarzenegger robots. But like small drones, like why wouldn't they use like small killer drones and things that are poisons that infiltrate your bloodstream or nanobots or something like that, right?
Right. Well, yeah, the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves. The robot turned out to be these, massively intelligent swarming bots that ended up, whatever it did to us, wiped us out. Yeah. What about Nick Bostrom's concerns about, the universal paperclip maker doesn't know to turn off and quit turning you and I into paperclips and so on, and pretty soon the whole universe is paperclips. That argument always struck me as a little absurd, but maybe I'm just not getting it. What's the real fear there?
So are you talking about if an AI is sort of given instructions and it carries out that instruction to the ultimate degree to the detriment of humanity? I think it is a fear, because sort of what we know about the way computers think is they're good at solving a problem that they're given, and they're ruthless in that, right? I mean, humans have these different other thoughts competing for attention, but an AI has what the instructions that it's given. So it will try to solve that problem in any way it can, if it has the latitude to do that, right? So there's sort of a natural constraint you could have in the programming code. It can only access these databases or whatever, so it only has access to that information. Or it could be open-ended, where that could be really scary. If you say, go browse the internet for whatever solutions you can find to overpopulation.
Right. Kill all the humans.
Problem, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the solution, right? That's pretty easy.
Well, actually. My response to that is regulation. We'll just regulate it. It'd be like, the example I use is I have a Tesla. So let's say I push the little button on the wheel there and I say navigate to LAX, and it's going to take me on the best route possible. But what if it decides the best route possible with the least amount of traffic is a sidewalk and it mows down pedestrians? Well, how long is it going to be before Elon gets slapped with, the federal government swoops in and says, you're not selling any more cars till you fix this software problem?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely that helps, but it's the kind of the unknown unknowns. Like, and what if something catastrophic happens before like by the time that happens, you've already mowed down a bunch of civilians, right? So, uh, if you have like in a military loop or something like that, it's got the nuclear codes, but only launch
Yeah.
under these conditions. Well, what if we
Right.
didn't think of all the conditions,
Right.
that,
Right.
so I think it's sort of the unknown unknowns.
Right. A single catastrophic event. I mean, you could,
Right.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. 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 So you work for Elon. You work at SpaceX. What's that like?
Yes. Oh, it's awesome. It's a kind of startup-y culture, really exciting. Everyone works really hard. It's wonderful. Yeah.
And do you guys sit around thinking about colonizing Mars? We're going to get the rockets up there soon.
Yeah, we definitely do. I mean, I'm a mission manager. I run a couple of NASA missions. So I'm working on a mission that will launch to impact an asteroid and see if we can divert the trajectory of an asteroid.
Really?
And that's a NASA mission. Yeah. And basically save humanity. But this asteroid isn't intending to hit us. And a X-ray telescope.
Wow. So how big is this spacecraft? And the asteroid must be pretty small if you can measure the nudge.
Yes, actually, that's a really good point. So it is a double asteroid redirect test. That's actually the acronym DART. And the asteroid is relatively small, but there are two of them. That's the key. So the asteroid is a few hundred, no, I think it's a few kilometers actually in size. And it has a moon, which is about 100 meters or something. So it has a small moon, and we're just going to hit the moon because the spacecraft is pretty small. It's like the size of a car. And if you hit the moon, you could measure the orbital period change around the central asteroid, right? So it's something you can measure very precisely. Whereas if you just hit an asteroid in open space, it's orbiting the sun. The nudge is going to be very, very slight, as you say, and you may not even be able to measure it with a margin of error.
Right. How do you get a spacecraft to an asteroid? How is that calculated? I mean, it's got to be incredible mathematics.
Yeah, sure. So NASA does the actual interplanetary trajectory planning for this mission, but it basically you get it within as close as you can, and then you measure using a star tracker. You look at see this where you are, the stars, and basically see your orientation. And so spacecraft have different forms of guidance systems. One is inertial guidance. It's like your smartphone. If you turn it around, it knows which way it's pointed because of acceleration, basically. So it kind of tries to measure that, but then it uses a star tracker for an external frame of reference, and it will do several course corrections during the transit to the asteroid. This is kind of what they did to get to the moon. Actually, they would at the time they physically measured their position with using like a kind of almost like a sextant or something like that. They looked at the stars and got kind of a read on where they were pointing, and they adjusted their course. So they had to do some mid-course course correction burns. So you get closer and closer and adjust your trajectory to hit it. And
wow, even for something as big as the moon and as close as the moon, relatively speaking.
Well, it wasn't just because you're not trying to crash into the moon, remember?
Right. That's right. You got to go in orbit around it. Right.
Orbit, right.
Right.
Yeah. But the moon is an incredibly small target at that range. So you can fit all the planets in the solar system between Earth and the moon. That's the distance. So Jupiter and Saturn and all that.
All right.
And,
wow.
If you see a plot and imagine like a marble or something like that, the moon is like on the other side of the gymnasium. It's really far away.
Right.
Yeah.
It just looks big in the sky.
It looks big in the sky. Yeah. Yeah. It's a pretty big object. It looks exactly the same size as the sun.
That's right. I know. What are the chances of that? God must... No, wait.
Well, I mean, there's some question of whether life on Earth owes something to the regular cycles of the moon in some way. But yeah.
Because of tides?
Tides is one thing. Potentially some kind of like deflection but yeah, I think tides is one of the main things. Yeah.
Oh, deflecting asteroids that would have wiped out.
Yeah, I don't think the moon would actually have a
Sometimes
significant...
Jupiter is credited with
Jupiter
that.
is huge for that. Definitely. Yeah. Jupiter's big into that.
Sweeping up all the debris before it gets to us. Yeah. Yeah, well, that may be one of those Fermi paradox type answers. They didn't have a Jupiter to sweep up all the debris in their solar system, and they got wiped out before they could get started. Something like that. Yeah, I want to ask you about what your answer to the Fermi paradox is, but let's first get into your book itself, I mean, the book is about all exploration. You really begin at the beginning in a very Sagan-esque way, this is our destiny to leave Africa and, go out, and that's why we have to explore the stars. Do you think there's something like that in human nature, this desire to explore, or do you think it's a sort of a byproduct of the fact that ecosystems get filled up and we have to move as populations increase?
Yeah, I totally think it's in our nature. Obviously, I think our nature is a product of evolution, but I do think that it is. We are different from other animals in certain ways. One is language, communication. I mean, other animals have rudimentary languages and things like that, but humans have it to a vastly different degree. Imagination might be one. That's the Yuval Noah Harari thing. Right. But I think this exploration thing is really one of them. And I think throughout history, it's been kind of this arms race where we develop a certain level of technology and that allows us to explore or expand. And then through that exploration and expanding, it creates the incentives that drive more technology, which allows us to do it even further. I mean, if you look at even just where we live today, without our technology, we wouldn't be able to occupy Siberia or Northern Europe or North America. I mean, we wouldn't be here basically without our technology. And that's all driven by this kind of expansionist urge. And I think that's always kind of been there because humans, I think, are generalists. We're almost like specialized generalists in a sense. And I think it's because our skill is kind of confronting challenge in general. Instead of, if we're faced with a problem, we can invent a way to solve it, build a new tool or something like that. And I think that's one of the things that makes us really unique. Kind of like an octopus.
Yes, very adaptive. Well, it's an adaptive intelligence. Talking about intelligence.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the kinds of intelligence we have is the adaptation to changing environments, not just biologically, but culturally, which we can then transmit to future generations. But I think of, hunter-gatherers, they had no idea we're living on this giant globe, and that, say, you're living in Siberia, and think, well, let's go to South America where it's warmer. They don't know there's a South America. That they're just kind of migrating, following the herds perhaps, or the climate, and they end up in Siberia, and then they're in Canada, and then Seattle, and before you know it, they're in Mexico and South America. But that
sure, absolutely. They didn't set out to travel to the Americas. Absolutely, yeah.
Or similar to the Polynesian migrations across the Pacific, they're just sort of looking for the next bit of land that they could get to by their various techniques. And before you know it, you've occupied pretty much every island, except I think Pitcairn Island had never been colonized.
Yeah, but even if that's true, it implies that humans faced with certain restrictions on their resources, would seek to try to travel somewhere else rather than just fight over the resources or something like that. So it's difficult to say how much. Yeah, I don't think humans were always kind of motivated by, let's see what's out there, like Captain Jean-Luc Picard or something like that. Right. But the net result is kind of the same, whether it's maybe like a pressure of resources or something like that. We are good at moving on to new pastures, or maybe it could be an outcome of something else, as you say. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, when Elon gave his I Have a Dream speech about, we got to become a multi-planetary species, so in case we trigger our own demise here, a lot of people responded to that and say, well, why don't we just spend the money solving our problems here so we don't go extinct? You must hear this.
Oh, yeah. I find this a very funny argument from the perspective of history, because I do think Pinker's absolutely right that things are better than they've ever been before. Crime rates are dramatically lower. Fewer people are living in poverty. We're better able to feed the population. We're not dying from diseases all the time like we were in the past. And if you think about any time in history when you could have said, oh, well, we could just fix our problems in Europe before we go out and
try to we never would have gone anywhere. Yeah.
They never would have gone anywhere. Exactly. Right. And the fact is, I think a lot of the times through history, going places and exploring has often generated, indirectly often, solutions to some of these problems. And in fact, it was actually the hardship that sort of motivated a lot of this, right? Like the reasons Europeans left Europe to try to break into the Indian Ocean spice network was basically because the Ottomans had occupied Constantinople and cut off the trade routes and cut off the Silk Road and stuff. So exploration has been motivated by trouble, far from saying, oh, well, let's just do it when we have no trouble.
Yeah. In fact, the animals become more active when they're hungry. They explore more environments because they're looking for food. I mean, evolution would select you to be less risk averse and more exploratory when you are in need of calories. So it's kind of like that. We need to branch out and go out here because we're running out of resources here.
This is sort of one of my fears, though, that we're too well off and we may not do it because we're too comfortable. And I think this is maybe the answer to the Fermi's paradox.
Another one, yes. Yeah.
Which is aliens maybe they have such technology that they can provide for all their needs, so they don't bother going anywhere. It's kind of like the Eloy in the Time Machine, and they're just like, well, we're happy and we can create VR and we can enjoy our movies and we can sit at home on the couch and entertain ourselves rather than actually going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really buy that one because I think it's not likely every single person in the population is going to have that attitude. Some will want to be explorers.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing is it doesn't take everyone. Like space fans always talking about building consensuses to go to the moon or Mars, but it's never been that way. Like how many people do you think were really even interested that this guy named Columbus was sailing like from Spain? No one knew about it really at the time, right? It takes a few people. It's always been that way throughout history. Yeah.
So my answer to the Fermi paradox is they're probably out there. There's probably not that many of them that got all the way to the point where they're doing space travel or they have radio telescopes or lasers to send signals or whatever. Because if you think about evolution of life on Earth, you could get all the way to Neanderthal level with brains as big as, if not bigger than ours. And they probably had some kind of language. They had tools, but they were not, Neanderthals had Europe to themselves for like 300,000 to 400,000 years. And they never developed any kind of technology like Homo sapiens did. And then for whatever reason, we outbred them or outgunned them or whatever, and they're extinct. So you could get all the way to that level and never have space travel, computers, lasers, telescopes, and so on. So nobody would know you're there. You'd never make contact. And that's a lot of evolution. I mean, that's, a gazillion selection steps between bacteria and big brains, and you still wouldn't make contact with anybody.
Absolutely.
So I think if they're out there, and also there's a lot of empty space between the stars. They could be exploring all over the place and easily miss us.
Yeah, absolutely. Although you're right. So you should never assume it's a mistake to assume that we are the end product of evolution, like we are the pinnacle, right? As you say, everything on Earth has always been undergoing evolution, and a cheetah is just as evolved as we are, right? So it's definitely a mistake to assume that aliens would evolve to automatically become intelligent, and even if they did, to develop spacefaring technology, right, and leave their planet. So I definitely think that's true. But I mean, so the Fermi paradox, though, is that Earth has been around for 4.6 billion years. The galaxy's been around for a lot longer than that, like 10 billion years maybe. And it took us a long time. Earth came pretty soon after, life came pretty soon after Earth was created. And we took a long time to evolve, right? Billions of years. And so if there was another alien species who were started around the same time or earlier than us, they could have reached our level of technology a long time ago.
Yeah.
And even at sublight speeds that we're pretty sure are possible, like 5% of the speed of light, they could have covered the entire galaxy within like 200 million years, which is a very small fraction of the time that we've been around. So they should be everywhere, right? So that implies that you're absolutely right. There probably aren't that many of them who reach a spacefaring technology. But even if there was one that reached sort of an interstellar technology in our galaxy that came before us, there has to be a different answer than that if there was even one.
Right.
So I kind of honestly like the zoo hypothesis, I have to say, which is the prime directive, basically. So why would they care about us? So they're probably rare, but there's probably one or two other ones in our galaxy, maybe, who knows? But they have no reason to be here. Like they just are not interesting to them yet because they would be so far ahead of us in technology. We can't even imagine they uploaded themselves into computers or whatever it is, right? Or found. Certainly they probably are immortal at this point because we're almost there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Immortal as a species, maybe if we we have the Voyager spacecraft out there, so something of us will continue on forever. Yeah, then there's the great filter answer that, something comes up, that they nuke themselves or they cook their
Yep.
planet, or meteors eventually hit the planets and cause mass extinctions and so on.
But if they were spacefaring, they would be insulated from a lot of that, unless there was some kind of interplanetary civil war, interstellar civil war, or something like that, where they managed to wipe themselves out and go back to the Stone Age.
This is our the unknown unknowns. I mean, it's I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be that smart. I mean, Michio Kaku makes the analogy that we be like us in an anthill. Do we even pay any attention to it? We're just so much smarter than ants in that sense. Maybe they just don't even notice us.
Yeah, although, I mean, they would share kind of a kinship with us in that they would have navigated the same challenges that we have to get to where they are. So even an ant may not be that interesting to us, I guess, because we see them all the time. They evolved on the same planet as us. But if we found an ant on another planet, that would be pretty darn interesting.
Yes. Anything on another planet would be interesting.
Right. So that's why I don't know if I totally buy that argument, because we could find extraterrestrial ants very interesting indeed.
Yeah.
We want to take some and put them in our ant colony.
Our own zoo. Well, it would be interesting to see what kind of replicating molecules they have, if it's the double helix structure. Or, Paul Davies makes this point about the second genesis. We should be looking for life, extraterrestrial life here on Earth, or not extraterrestrial, but different. A second or third genesis. We haven't found anything like that.
No, it seems that all life shares a common origin on Earth. That's probably origin, the most likely. Yeah. Which is interesting, but you could say that maybe other life would somehow be blocked, but from developing, because there's already sort of established. I mean, we have oxygen in the atmosphere because
right.
By Earth, so maybe other geneses would find that oxygen toxic or whatever it is, something that life came first.
Also, if there was a second genesis, it probably would have been billions of years ago, and that data is gone.
Totally.
Just in the rock formation, just eaten up, gone. So we may never know. Yeah, because we're not likely to find them living now. So all the more important, we get to Mars and see if actually see if there might be some living organisms there, deep hot biosphere, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that there may be life on Mars. Obviously, it would be sort of microbial or something like that underground, probably. But I mean, we have bacteria that could survive on Mars today. And given how long Mars has been around, and the fact that it was probably warmer and wetter at one point, and life on Earth developed during that period, and we find life in similar conditions on Earth now, like in Antarctica and underground lakes, basically. It seems crazy almost to assume that there definitely wouldn't be life on Mars. I mean, obviously we have no evidence that there is, but it's a perfectly reasonable hypothesis that there could be.
Yeah. What about that idea that we're Martians?
Yeah, totally. Panspermia. Yeah.
Or
I mean,
wherever
pieces of Mars are blasted off by impacts and travel through space, and we find rocks on Earth that are from Mars and have organic molecules, which I say is a long way from actual working organisms, like a long way from a cell. But all you need is replication and energy conversion. Basically, that's what life. All it takes for life is replication and energy conversion. And so, if you have like RNA chains that can do that, I think that's the most likely hypothesis for how life started, is just RNA chains, self-replicating RNA chains.
Right. So the first human colonies on Mars, they can't take precautions to prevent human organisms or other earthly organisms from. We're gonna populate that planet with our stuff when that happens. Well, it's probably already happened. Well, unless some of the spacecraft have been.
May have. Yeah, there's some question of whether Surveyor 6, which went to the moon, it was recovered by Apollo 12, actually had carried bacteria. They found bacteria samples on it, but it's unclear if the samples were contaminated. But we do know that bacteria can survive in space for extended periods, certain bacteria.
And just parenthetically, The Martian, how accurate was that, do you think?
I have a YouTube video about the science in The Martian, and overall I would say it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain things that are kind of laughable that they just didn't really think about. Like one thing that gets me is, so he's living in a pressurized room, and he just takes some duct tape and puts up some plastic wrap, and that's supposed to keep I mean, the atmosphere of Mars is 1%, and
Yeah.
he's got to be at least 20% of Earth, or he can breathe, right? So
Right.
even if he's got a vastly reduced pressure, so the cumulative weight on that plastic wrap would be the weight of a rhinoceros or something, and he's just
Ew.
holding it with duct tape.
Right.
It's really kind
Okay.
of funny, but people just don't think about that kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
like air. Air is light, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Air is light. Right. Yeah.
Air's not light at
That's
all.
funny. What about
Yeah.
potatoes? Could you grow potatoes?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. I mean, obviously, you would need nutrients and stuff, but I guess he uses his
Yeah. Yeah.
waste.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
they've done some experiments on Martian equivalent soil and grown plants. So you need the biomass and you need water.
I like that movie
Yeah.
because it showed scientists solving problems and being the hero.
More of an engineer, wouldn't you say?
More of an engineer. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well,
That's right. Yeah.
I think he was a botanist, but yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Actually,
Botanist. Well, call him whatever he's a STEM person. He uses science, technology,
yeah,
engineering, and math
yeah,
to be the hero.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
So let's get into your book. What led you to write this? I see you're Canada's greatest know-it-all. The book is filled with just fascinating little
Yeah,
trivia, minutia. Did that just
yeah.
come out of your head because you know so much stuff?
Yeah. So whenever I'm writing something, I have, oh, what about this? What about this? And I really like Mary Roach's book, and she does a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
love her work.
footnotes. So I
Yeah,
thought, yeah, I might as well just like put them in, right? If I'm having this interesting thought, maybe people will like them, maybe they won't. I don't know. And they can just skip them. Just skip all the footnotes if you don't
yeah,
like them. But
yeah,
I have all these tangents going off my brain. Well, what about this? What about this?
yeah.
So yeah.
I loved all that stuff. It's super interesting. Is that so? So. Could you win a Jeopardy contest because of all this knowledge you have?
Yeah. So I actually had an interview for Jeopardy recently.
You
So we'll
did?
see if so I may appear on it in the
Oh,
next
cool.
year or something like that. Yeah. However, I mean, I'm at certain categories, I can sweep definitely everything, like history, geography, science, anything like that. But I'm not that great at pop culture and certain things, and sports I'm pretty bad at. So there's certain categories. I have definite weak spots that would make me not a rock star Jeopardy champion for sure. But in certain categories, absolutely, yeah.
You'd have to bulk up on Shakespeare and British
Yeah.
kings and queens and
Actually, much better British stuff than American literature, for example, because I'm from Canada. So we read a lot of British books, but we didn't. That American literature, for example, is something that even for the Jeopardy interview, I just read a synopsis of the top 10 books because the only famous American literature book I ever read was Moby Dick. And that was just on my own because I wanted to read it. But
right.
Shakespeare, I'm not bad at, actually.
All right.
A lot of Shakespeare.
Where are you from in Canada?
Ottawa?
Okay. And how did you get into science or engineering? Sorry.
Actually, my mother worked for Air Canada,
Oh,
and I
all
really
right.
liked airplanes. And I guess I wanted to go to school to build airplanes.
Right. All right. Let's just kind of go through because I want to end with the whole last section of becoming a spacefaring civilization. All that because it's super fascinating. But just kind of give us the broad overview of out of Africa and then the Mediterranean and Europe and the Americas and so forth.
Yeah, the book is a history of exploration from the beginning of humanity into the future. And I see this as kind of this trajectory that we're in somewhere in the middle of. And that's why, it goes up to the third part and that gets us to here. And then the fourth part is the future. The first part being everything up to the fall of Rome. So it's what the ancients knew. And one thing that I found really interesting about that is the world was a lot more connected back in the time of the Greeks and the Romans than it was in the so-called Dark Ages, anytime up to the Renaissance, basically. And I sort of had some vague senses that there was some connection between China and Rome. But when I did research about it, there actually were some pretty well documented expeditions. And I had no idea that the Romans had an annual fleet convoy that sailed to India, basically. There was a lot of connection between India and Rome, and Romans used spices, just like we hear with the Europeans. So the age of exploration was kind of a rediscovery, just like the Renaissance of rediscovery of the classics. But the age of exploration was a rediscovery of the geographic knowledge that the Romans and Greeks actually knew. They wrote a travel guide of the Indian Ocean back about 2,000 years ago, and it identified East African ports down as far as Madagascar.
Wow,
which is just crazy, right? Because we don't hear about any of that stuff. Alexander the Great, when he reached India, he commissioned an admiral to sail down and explore the coast of India and the Persian Gulf. So, I mean, this is stuff that they all knew and then forgot.
Right.
Basically. and then it was rediscovered. The only exception being the Americas, of course, which were accidentally stumbled into.
Yeah. So these are primarily trade routes?
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing about the book, I think definitely the center of civilization is basically the Indian Ocean. And this is the connection between East Africa and the Middle East and India and China and Southeast Asia. And these were all coming together. And it was this spice trade. And also, I mean, China was the equivalent of Europe in population and economic output. And so this is the center of the world. And the Europeans were motivated by actually a relative poverty and backwardness at the time in the 1400s. And they were trying to break into this center of the world. I read a really good book about the Ottoman age of exploration, and that sort of influenced that section a little bit. But I've always been really interested in Ottoman history. And people say, well, the Ottomans had like the best navy in the world in the 1500s. Why didn't they sail to Europe? Or sorry, why didn't they sail to the Americas? Actually, they had maps of the Americas. And they did actually attack ships off the coast, the colonies, the American colonies. So they had sailed to the Americas and had pirates even around the islands of Britain. But they just basically didn't care because they were already in the best place in the world. They were already right along the spice routes. Right. And in fact, we always think about the Portuguese bringing spices around Africa as being such a big deal. But it wasn't that they created they created a new trade route, but all the spices were already coming into Europe through the Red Sea and through Egypt. And it was the Ottomans who were getting the profits. So the Portuguese were really just trying to undercut the Ottomans by sailing around Africa. It wasn't like it wasn't like they were discovering a new source of spices or anything like that. They were just trying to circumvent existing trade routes.
So the motivation was economic more than exploratory.
Well,
or both.
It was economic. In some sense, I would say it was religious, because Columbus left all the profits he made to basically a crusading society. And the Portuguese also were trying to displace the Ottomans. They were really trying to get the profits from the spice trade and undercut the Ottomans because they wanted to fund a crusade to retake the Holy Land, which was occupied by the Ottomans. So yeah, definitely economic motivation, but also a strong religious one as well.
Yeah. Convert the natives.
Yeah.
Save their souls for Christianity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now let's back up a little bit more. So the first seagoers to Australia, the first migrants to Australia out of Africa, I think that's what, 60, 70,000 years?
Yeah, it's disputed whether it's 40 or around, or somewhere between 70 and 40, I think is the number. Yeah.
And they couldn't have walked there even with because the Wallace line there, even with the sea levels much lower, they'd still have to take boats.
Correct. Yeah. The thing is, though, you can cross that route on a raft today, and it's longer, right? From Timor, people do that today. Refugees from Timor. So would you be able to see across it? I think you probably would. Actually, you can right now today walk to a part of the United States in Alaska and see Russia. So
right. Yeah. Well, Sarah Palin can see Russia from her house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was in Juneau, so that's a little far away.
Yeah, it's a little far away. Yeah.
Or Anchorage, maybe at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So the boats wouldn't have had to be that sophisticated. Although to colonize or migrate across the Pacific, you'd have to have pretty sophisticated boats.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, this is why I think the settlement of North America was probably done by boat. People always talk in your history book about walking along the glaciers, but that makes no sense whatsoever. No, you can see across. It was probably boats.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about massive ice sheets, well, there's nothing to eat for the animals you're supposedly following.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and living on the coast would be pretty good living.
Exactly. The first sophisticated humans, I think, were in South Africa, and they were collecting mollusks, basically seafood, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I live in Santa Barbara, and there's settlements of 13,000 years ago. Of course, that makes a lot of sense because the climate's great. There's plenty of fish and shellfish, and they would have had a pretty good life here, and all the way up pretty far north before it starts getting
Alaska
cold.
Today's temperate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The problem is that wherever they stayed, whatever caves or whatever artifacts would be a couple 100 feet underwater now. So we're probably never going to find it.
Exactly. Yep. The coastline would have been further south. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, where are we now? So we're up to the Roman Empire. So that falls in 476. And then you have the Dark Ages. And anyway, so pick us up there, and with the age of exploration after that, and how dark were the dark ages for exploration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there is no formally agreed upon date for the Roman Empire falling, and I think our idea of the barbarians conquering Rome has been overturned in recent years, and we sort of see it more of this as a fusion or a diffusion maybe into Europe. And Franks were basically all the barbarians were basically just trying to be Roman, right? And that's why we're still Roman in a sense,
right?
I mean, our capital literally named after the hill in Rome,
right?
Capital, right? Everything about our architecture and actually, I find it kind of hilarious, the fascistes in the Congress and stuff like that, the president's office, like all the symbols of ancient Rome, which were
usurped
by Mussolini and the fascists.
We're still Roman.
We're still Roman, and our language is a fusion of Greek and
a lot of the law, Germanic. Legal system.
Our alphabet is literally the Latin alphabet.
Yeah, that's right.
So, in a lot of ways, we're still Roman. But the Romans were probably the best traveled people of all time, Mary Beard thinks, because most of the citizens were in the army, and the Romans were marching all the way around the Mediterranean. So they got a free travel pass around all these lands. So they were interacting with a lot of people. And I think that's one of the things that really made them dynamic. But follow Rome. So then it picks up with the Vikings, who were kind of the furthest reaching European explorers up until the age of exploration, and them arriving in the Americas for the first time for Europeans. But the middle part of the book is about the age of exploration, but it's also about China's age of exploration and the Indian Ocean, setting the case that we call it the Mediterranean, like the sea, which is the classical civilizations. But I think the Indian Ocean has another claim to be the Mediterranean, right?
Right.
It's the sea at the center of Earth. That's what the name means, right? And if you look at it, the wealthiest civilizations at the time, if you compare Europe and China in the year 1400, China was ahead in almost every respect.
Yeah.
Europe was devastated by the Black Death and the 100 Years' War and all these things. And it was a total backwater of the world in education and almost anything. And China was the real glowing gem on the world stage. And they had massive fleets of ships exploring the Indian Ocean, trading with India and East Africa and the Middle East. And you could almost imagine this alternate arc in history where the Chinese explored the Americas and settled in California. And it was really, you had conquistadors going through Mexico, and they were really poised to do that. And the question is, why didn't they? And why did Europe do that instead? And I think that to a large degree, the answer is competition in Europe. That's one of the main things. You had a single monolithic empire in China.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we're going to stop all this overseas voyage.
Right.
And they basically closed themselves off from goods, but more importantly, ideas. And they weren't really interested, because in China, where you have political control vested in a small minority, they don't want change. Change comes from a desire to upset the status quo, right? Whereas in Europe, even though each individual kingdom may not be particularly interested in change, they're all competing against each other. So Columbus went to Portugal, they said no. Went to England, said no. Went to France, said no. Went to Spain, said no. Went to Genoa, said no. Back to Spain and said, okay, maybe.
Right.
And so they're all competing against each other. And Portugal said no because they already had the route to India around Africa. So we don't want to upset our monopoly. What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah, this is when they didn't know the Americas were in the way between Europe and Asia. Yeah.
And just like in science, all these geographic discoveries come about because people are pretty bad at geography and make a lot of accidents. Like the two greatest expeditions in history, potentially Columbus and Magellan, come about because they were bad at geography.
Well, you miscalculated the length of whatever the measure was to get from Europe to Asia. It would have been right had the Americas not been there and the Earth been smaller.
Right. Yeah. He dramatically underestimated by a factor of 5, at least, I think it was, the distance to Asia. Yeah. Because he was using a different fanciful map from 1474. This Italian astronomer Toscanelli made this map that was just completely wrong. And it was based on a misunderstanding of miles, because there was a Persian geographer, Alpherganus, who had communicated through time. The ancients, Eratosthenes, knew how big Earth was, and he had made this calculation, and Columbus, I guess, read it from this Persian geographer. And Arabic miles are very different from Roman or European miles, which we use. So they were just off by that. Plus, the ancients had overestimated the width of Asia, so they were off by that. And you compound those two things, and you get a dramatic difference, because all the error is then concentrated in this one place, which is the difference between Europe and Asia across the Atlantic and Pacific. And so they end up shrinking it by a factor of 5.
Yeah. Daniel Borston's got a great discussion of that in his book, The Discoverers, where, and I use this as an example of the confirmation bias, where, he runs into the Americas and goes, well, I'm in Asia. Okay.
Yeah.
So that bush, that's definitely that Asian species. And this coconut, that's definitely that Indian, whatever seed. And you're just looking at it through that model, and that's what you see. You just, if it's close enough and you kind of bend it in your mind's eye, you can make it fit.
And the natives are saying, oh, there's this big gold city where the nobles all walk around in golden robes and they have all these giant temples. And he's like, oh, that must be those Chinese cities Marco Polo read about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, amazing. And he never knew he was in a new continent, right?
Well, I think he should have known by that point. I think he was completely deluding himself by the end of his life. In the first voyage, it was pretty easy to make that mistake, and it's reasonable. It was sort of a reasonable mistake. But by the end, that was after Martin Waldseemüller made his map of what the world really looked like. And I think Columbus was just deluding himself by the end of his life.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. We lost that knowledge of the ancient Greeks who knew how big the globe was. And of course, Columbus and none of them discovered the Earth was not flat. They all knew it was a globe.
Correct. Yeah, that no one ever thought Earth was flat until apparently today.
Yeah, until a couple months ago when that meme took off, and we're still dealing with it now. It's crazy. Okay, so the age of exploration then launches all this colonization, and very much combination of economics and religion, and of course the pushback against colonialism now, sees this as, like one of the worst things that ever happened. This is one of the critics of people like Pinker and myself, that, why all this progress was going on that you guys talk about, the eradication of disease and civil rights and civil liberties and all this great stuff. Europeans were colonizing people and killing them and enslaving them.
Right. Well, I think humans have always basically lived in squalor. I mean, times were bad. People always think, oh, in the good old days, right? Like the 1950s. Oh, you mean when like 20% of Americans lived in poverty and didn't even have plumbing in their house? Oh, those good old days.
Right.
I think people overestimate the what life was like back in the past, and underestimate how good people have it today.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely true that there were severe negative consequences of Europeans going out into the world. Slavery existed in Africa before, but it was much, much worse when Europeans abducted them and took them across the Atlantic and worked them to death in plantations. And, colonialism also has left some legacies, really horrible legacies in Africa and things like that. So my point is not necessarily that exploration was only a good thing for humanity. It had both negative and positive consequences. It is that it happened, and it had a huge impact on where we are today in driving a lot of the technologies we have, in creating the incentives to improve our shipbuilding technologies, which allowed transport across the Atlantic, aviation technologies, basically even railroads, transportation. In some cases, I use the word exploration pretty broadly to mean kind of transportation, I guess, but just the incentive to move around, to move goods around for different purposes. So huge impact on the world, not necessarily only for the good. But I think there's even, Niall Ferguson has a good book on empire, which is the kind of positive effects of the British Empire uniting the world in a sense, and having it's one of the main reasons we have a universal language today. Yeah. So definitely horrible for some people, good for others, some benefits and some detriments.
Much of the moral progress Pinker and I write about is a correction of those errors that we made centuries ago. Really, I just had Christopher Ryan on my podcast just a couple hours ago. His book is Civilized to Death, so he's critical of a lot of the negative aspects of civilization. For example, after farming, you see skeletons get smaller. There's more arthritis. The dentistry is worse. The more tooth decay and so on, just because the diets are less varied and they're crappier diets.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so on and so on. Communicable diseases, really the invention of civilization. This is Jared Diamond's point in Guns, Germs, and Steel. The reason Native Americans got wiped out by all our diseases is because they didn't evolve in these communities, large communities with domesticated animals, in which they, became inoculated. And so they got, immediately wiped out by our germs and then guns and steel. Anyway, but it's once you go down the pathway though towards civilization, there's really no going back. You just can't revert.
Absolutely. The genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah. I mean, populations just get to a point. Christopher and I were talking about this. This is very interesting. If you think about the evolution of this, no one invented farming or agriculture. Nobody said, "Hey, I got this great idea. We're going to stop hunting and we're going to plant these seeds." It's just, as the water, as the temperature is getting better and it's getting warmer and, lands are more fertile and so on, the populations start to increase. The carrying capacity of the environment comes just a little bit more. It's a little bit larger. Then you have a little bit of a drop off of the climate for a little while. And it's like, well, what are we going to do now? So they, then farming becomes a little more sophisticated and so on. And then, a couple centuries later, a couple thousand years later, there's no going back. And we've been on on this path ever since. So really progress is kind of like, well, we're trying to correct all the mistakes we've made along the way because we can't go back to the way things used to be and never will.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's also just things like inter-farmer competition, like Joe's crops are doing better, so I'm going to use those seeds that he used. It's all the domestication of animals and plants was all an accident. Nowadays we do it with genetic engineering, but back in the day it was just the ones that survived better or were tastier or whatever it is. Those were the ones that were successful because they were selected for accidentally almost.
Yeah. Yeah, the Columbian exchange. I mean, Europeans brought certain things over to America, but then they took stuff from America back to, I forget,
like
potatoes. Yeah.
Huge impact on Europe because they grow differently from wheat. You can grow them in different climates and they don't fail when the wheat crop fails. They're a reliable food source. You can dig out of the ground. You can keep them in the ground for a long time. They last a lot longer. It's the highest calorie per acre crop in the entire world.
Potatoes.
So potatoes, huge impact on Europe in ending the systematic famines that would plague Europe every year.
Yeah. So there you go. For Mars, take potatoes.
Yeah, it's a good food, actually. I specifically do identify potatoes. Yeah. Potatoes and milk is a full diet. Basically, it's called the Irish diet.
Yeah. So now if we get up in, say, the 19th century, the age of exploration is largely over. There's not that much left to find. A lot of it is sort of recreational exploration for status or, national pride or just curiosity. Like guys going to the North Pole and the South Pole and Everest and so on. There, it does seem to kind of tap into your, we have this urge in our nature to go where no man has gone before, where no one has gone before.
Cook, originally.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I read that in your book. I thought that was great. Yeah, you made that reference about Star Trek, where they got that from Captain Cook. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's right. I kind of forgot about. So let's talk a moment again about migrating across the Pacific and colonizing all those islands. I mean, those islands are so far apart. How did they navigate? It's just by eye, by the clouds or the temperature, the winds, where the birds are going. I mean, they had all these techniques that we've lost.
Yeah. Even ocean currents, you can kind of, because an island will break up the wave patterns, so you can study them really carefully and I guess discern that there maybe is land over there from that. But you're right, the birds, they would actually take birds and release them and see if they fly towards land or come back to the ship, because then they can see from 100 feet or whatever it is, right. See if there's land out there. Clouds tend to, I guess, accumulate over mountains, so they could look for where the clouds are. But all these things, but you're right, it's remarkable because these were hundreds, in some cases thousands of miles apart, and they're just kind of going out and somehow finding them. I mean, Europeans, when they first encountered this, thought they must have all been on the supercontinent that sank, and just the mountains were still sticking up, and these are all the remnants of this people that formerly inhabited the supercontinent. But they realized that wasn't possible because they all shared the same language,
right,
or more or less, right? And so Captain Cook had this translator from, I think it was around Fiji, and he took them to New Zealand, and they show up, and no one expects that they'll be able to communicate. He doesn't expect it. Has no idea, because even the Polynesians have lost this aspect of their history, and they just walk up and start talking.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the ways, besides genetics, now that archaeologists and anthropologists tracked how the migration went, was through language, common language.
Yeah.
Which is how we know that the Americas were not discovered by Polynesians. They stopped. Well, presumably they stopped.
Well, so that's a good question. That's something I touch on in the book, and I actually was curious to get your take on it, because so certainly I would acknowledge that there was no significant cultural influence, possibly odds and ends. And I know that we definitely must remain skeptical about this, but I think given just the geography, and given that the Polynesians crossed so much territory to reach the furthest outpost of islands, and then we presume they just stop.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't seem. It seems like some of them
versus the Americas,
somebody
right, which
must have
giant
gone all the way. Yeah,
I think that someone must have gone, but we can't say conclusively they did.
Yeah,
so obviously, it still remains completely in the realm of conjecture. But there's also the spread of sweet potatoes. When Cook showed up in New Zealand, the Polynesians already had sweet potatoes.
Right.
And so Europeans didn't bring them around the world, and they probably didn't float. So how did they get there?
Right.
So that's one of the big pieces of evidence that I think does suggest that at least there was some limited trade or contact between Polynesia and South America, and it kind of just supports all the very circumstantial evidence that exists.
Yeah, I remember the Tor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki business. Yeah, always super interesting. Yeah, his hypothesis was that they went from South America across to the islands. Yeah, now
which I think is definitely disproven at this point. Right. But the idea that the Polynesians could have gone to South America, I think, is 50-50. I don't know. I think it's quite possible. Yeah.
I do too, yeah. And part of the problem, as we mentioned before, is a lot of this coastal stuff is underwater now. So whatever sightings or little settlements might have been made, they're gone. They're just underwater, eroded, gone.
Yeah.
The data's not there.
Well, yeah, with data, one thing I was surprised by is we can't even figure out what happened to Amelia Earhart 70 years ago, 80 years ago. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Can't tell if there's a wreckage of a modern airplane on an island. Like, how do people not know this?
Yeah.
Try to compare that to what the Polynesians...
I think they just went in the drink and the plane sank in 5 minutes, and that was the end of that. Yeah,
Maybe.
Likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I follow some of that. Yeah, they find a little shoe, sole of a shoe, and it's about her size, and maybe, and then there was that one last year with the some old photograph from the 1932 on a Japanese trawler, and there's a woman, looks like a Caucasian woman, and maybe, and if you squint and use your imagination, I can imagine that's Amelia Earhart. Yeah, I mean, I think even better would be if there was some Polynesian genes in some South American peoples, or something like that. That would be a little more convincing. In the other side, those Olmec statues that have kind of African features, that seems more plausible because it's pretty close. The western part of Africa and the eastern part of Brazil, that's not that far apart.
Well, it's about the same distance from Easter Island to South America,
yes.
As compared with from Africa to Brazil. I think that's about the same distance, like 2,000 miles ish.
Have you been to Easter Island?
No.
Oh, it's pretty cool.
I assume you have? Yeah.
Yeah, I did this round the world trip where I was a lecturer on one of these huge gutted 747s where everybody had a first class seat. These people paid $50,000 a head. I couldn't believe it. This is how the 0.01% live, right? So we spent a month flying around the world. So we went across the Pacific, and when you're just sitting there looking out the window, it's just nothing and nothing, and hours and hours and hours of just nothing at the speed of a 747. Like, holy crap, how did these people do this? It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, that is, exactly. The fact that they would reach that island, which is, I think, 1,200 miles from the Marquesas, where they would have come from, and then not go another 1,000 or 2,000 miles to the Americas is just, it doesn't seem that likely to me.
I know. Yeah, I suspect when all's said and done, whatever that means, that there'll have been multiple migrations to and from America. The America is just such a huge landmass right in the middle.
Well, we know that for sure.
Yeah.
So actually, like the Inuit, for example, arrived much later than most Native Americans. They're arrivals from Eurasia that arrived about 4,000 years ago, and then spread across the north and they brought new technologies from Asia with them.
Right.
So we already know that happened conclusively.
Wasn't Kennewick Man? He was. I'm trying to remember. He wasn't Asian like in the normal route that they think of, but you know who I'm talking about? Kennewick Man was like 10,000 years old skeleton found in Seattle area, and he had died violently. This is the reason I'm familiar with it. You know, there's like a spear point and bashed his head in, and so on. But he was from I think it was similar to Ainu, sort of like Japanese.
Oh yeah,
Ainu, something like that. He had different features. You know, and then and again, you mentioned the Vikings coming over. There must have been lots of migrating individuals, you know, from Iceland to Greenland to Newfoundland, and that data is just gone. I mean, maybe even many thousands of years ago.
Yeah, it's surprising how big the settlement at L'Anse Meadow, which is the only one we know of, actually was. It probably supported 100 people. Like the main hall was the size of a basketball court, and it had about a dozen dwellings. It's not a small thing. It's not like a little camp. It is a town, basically.
Right.
So the idea that would be the only one, I find, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the problem for science is, of course, we can't say anything other than that's the one we have.
Right.
You know, I encounter this in my regular job with, you know, the alternative archaeologists. They have all kinds of theories about all sorts of things, but, you know, yes, maybe this, maybe that, but, you know, well, we found this Roman coin in Minnesota. It's like, yeah, but, you know, there's other ways it could have gotten there. And, or the rune, the little runic symbols, you know, well, maybe, but your little patternicity going on there. I think I see what looks like this, but maybe not.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah. It's Occam's razor, basically. Whatever the simplest explanation is more likely to be true. So, yeah, definitely. And, yeah.
All super interesting. And the lost tribe of Israel, they got here to the Americas. You know, this is the whole Mormon story, right?
Yeah.
You know, they came here in 600 BC.
That was composed by a guy behind a bed sheet or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Who was reciting from an angel, but no one could actually watch him do it.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so then we're into the 20th century, and I love your section on the space exploration and rockets and all that stuff, and all that's super interesting. And so there, you're talking about, you know, with the space race, we're back to national pride and kind of, you know, military might, and we don't want to fall behind the Russians in the missile race. So, well, what are we doing with missiles? Okay, and so on, and we're off and running.
Yeah, there's no question that that's why we went to the moon. And even Sputnik was just a sideshow accident. I mean, Korolev was like von Braun. He did want to send people into space and, you know, colonize other planets and that sort of thing. But he was working for the military and he was developing ballistic missiles. And the only reason the Soviets cared about ballistic missiles was because America was far away and America had air superiority. So they would shoot down any Soviet bombers that tried to drop an atomic bomb in America. So the Soviets had to develop a means to counter this, to counter American air superiority, which was rockets. If we fly around in orbit, or actually suborbital, so if we fly into space, we avoid interception if we fly at extremely high velocities. So we fly through space, then we can hit America anywhere, and then we sort of at least stalemate the Cold War.
Yeah.
And then Korolev had this idea, well, just put a satellite on it. What about that? We could just do this as a demonstration of our ability to hit anywhere in the world. And it was a brilliant idea, but it was a total publicity stunt. It did nothing. Sputnik was just sitting at this radio beacon, but it got people really interested.
Yeah. Well, it changed our culture and politics and education. In terms of the evolution creation debate, I followed this, where basically after the Scopes trial in 1925, evolution was so controversial that people just quit teaching it. And it wasn't until Sputnik that the concern became we're falling behind the Russians in all science. So we got to start teaching this evolution stuff again, which is why most of the major developments in evolutionary theory came from Europeans in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It wasn't until the 60s that Americans kind of got back on board. That's a little bit of a sidebar, but yes. So Sputnik triggers that. Korolev, I was glad to see him featured heavily in this. There's a big space museum in Moscow that I visited last year. and he's a major feature in there with photographs. I mean, he was unknown. He was just called, what was it, the engineer? No, he was what was the space engineer or the chief engineer or something like that. They didn't even give him a name because they were afraid Americans would send assassins to kill him and all this crazy stuff. I mean, this is Cold War craziness, but it got us to the moon ultimately.
Yeah, it spurred the Americans to action because we realized how far behind we were, and it's the reason the moon was selected as a target was because how far behind America was, because it was something that the Soviets couldn't do right away because the Soviets had far bigger and better rockets for a long period of time because they had this incentive to develop these ballistic missiles in America. And it's like, it didn't really matter because we can just bomb them with our B-29s or
Right.
B-36s, whatever it is. So, but America had to choose a target in space that was so hard that no one knew how to do it.
Right.
So they could redefine the goal and catch up and win.
Yeah, no, it's a great story that when Kennedy gives that speech, that we could go to the moon and do the other thing, and he sort of had a list of stuff. What can we do, to kick to kick the ass of the Russians? Let's do that moon thing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he cared personally.
Yeah. Probably not. I mean, apparently Johnson had more interest in space exploration and getting to the moon than Kennedy did. Less politicized, although it was all politicized. But yeah, and then apparently they didn't even know where is the moon exactly? How do you know exactly where it's going to be in 3 days to get your orbit correct? As you pointed out earlier, they had to make course corrections along the way. It's pretty primitive.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, they were up on rooftops with sextants doing calculations in astrodynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the first computers, actually. One of the first digital computers developed by MIT. Digital computer. Yeah, and it used magnetic tape, and ropes, actually.
Yeah, ropes. I know. Incredible. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, you list all the benefits of space exploration, the space race, one of which is really digital computers. I mean, at the time, we did not have the capacity to put so many, chips, so many, transistors on a chip.
Yep.
And so NASA just puts the bid out. It can't be any bigger than this. Okay, go. And it's like, all right, now we're motivated to try to figure this out. And Intel and whoever else got the bid for that.
That's the whole theme of the book, actually, is just as you say, exploration, I think, creates the incentives to solve problems because it says, humanity, let's try to do this. It's really hard. We don't know how to do it. So let's figure it out. And it just stimulates this kind of, because I think everything in life is about incentives, and you don't do things unless you have a reason to do them. And it's not like we sit around just developing technologies for no reason. Technology follows purpose. So you set a purpose first, and then you fill in the gap and learn how to do it. You can't just have the technology and say, oh, well, what are we going to do with this technology that we developed for no reason?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about von Braun again recently because I was watching that. There was a Netflix series, it was Netflix, on what's it? Ivan the Terrible. John de Mununk. He was that Ford worker in Ohio who then got busted as being, well, somebody. He was Ivan the Terrible at Treblinka, or he was Ivan the Nasty at Sobibor. He was something. So there's 6 hours. So the first 5 hours are all about his trials and tribulations and all the business that went through. But the last episode is based on a book called Useful Enemies. So they interview the author, talking head, super interesting guy. So he's saying, why are we picking on this John de Mununk? He's a nobody. In fact, half the NASA engineers were German. And the top guy, what did he do? He built the V2 rockets that killed, tens of thousands of Englishmen, and he knew about the slave labor at what was it? Peenemünde, yeah, that were Jews were dying at this case. He knew about this stuff. So because he was useful to us. That's why.
That is why. Yeah, absolutely. Operation Paperclip tried to rescue or abduct or whatever you want to call it.
Before the Russians got him.
Before the Russians, as many German scientists as possible. Exactly, yeah.
It's a crazy story, but there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but just like Korolev, I mean, he also was motivated by trying to get to space and just could find military funding. And if you're living, how much of a collaborator was he? Obviously, he went along with it. He was definitely a collaborator, but I would say maybe kind of a soft collaborator rather than a hard collaborator because it was kind of a means to an end.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's morally messy? Yeah. But I mean, does it mean he was an evil person?
Yeah.
Probably not.
I think
mean,
not. Yeah, no, I come down on the
gray area
side
there,
of
right?
I like him and Korolev, and that's just the world they lived in. I can't say I would for sure, take a moral stand and say no. I'm not going to do my live stream working on rockets because you're a Nazi. I don't know that I would have done that, and so I can't blame him for doing that. In any case, here we are. This is how things go.
Right. Exactly. We can't really change history. We can just try to fix our mistakes for the future.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start expanding out from Earth and past the. Is there any reason to go back to the moon? This business will land on the moon and then from the moon go to Mars. Why would you do that? That always struck me as more expensive, time consuming, more energy is needed because you got to speed up and then slow down and then take off again.
Yeah, I kind of think not. I'm definitely a Mars first kind of person, but because as you say, it's not that much easier to go to the moon than it is to go to Mars. And we've already done that. There's some limited objectives. I mean, we haven't really explored the moon, but what does that really mean? It's kind of like a rock, right? So
Yeah.
the purpose of going to space is to cross it to get to the other side.
Right.
It's not just to like float around. I mean, that is, I guess, for tourists' purpose, but it's crossing. So what is the place we want to go? I think the only place that makes sense as an ultimate destination in the near term, rather than going to other stars, which is way off, is Mars, because it has a lot of features that could support a human civilization. It has an atmosphere that's useful, carbon dioxide, it has a lot of water, it has seasons, and it has daylight that's similar to Earth. It has natural resources like metals. It should have those in the same relative abundances. So it could support long-term human civilization. The moon, not so much, maybe with a lot of assisted technology and stuff, but it's a lot of trouble. So I definitely think going to Mars makes a lot more sense. Whether going to the moon sort of on the way to Mars makes any sense, possibly. I think having a destination is important. So going somewhere is better than going nowhere, and having a purpose is a motivational factor that drives technology and gets somewhere. So I'd prefer a NASA goal to get to the moon to a NASA goal to do kind of nothing. But but I do definitely think Mars is the better place to go. The question is whether NASA, for example, would be ambitious enough to try to do it Mars without going to the moon, and possibly not.
So at SpaceX, what's the best timeline to put people on Mars? 10 years?
I don't ever talk about timeline.
Okay.
And I can't speak to what SpaceX's official position on anything like that is, but I guess SpaceX, I guess, would maybe do some lunar missions. There's definitely we have contracts for doing that kind of stuff, but I guess me personally, my view is that I think Mars is a better destination.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, Elon was talking about this, like by 2030, we'll have people there. I mean, is this really doable? So, how many problems are there to solve to do that?
If you look at the technological progression of what's been achieved in the last 10 years, say, I think it's plausible. Let's say that.
Yeah. How long does it take to get there? 6 months at best?
Yeah, 6 to 9 months. Yeah, depending on trajectory.
And how would people hold up? Well, people have been in. Some of those Russians were up for more than a year. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. It would take you less time to get to Mars, significantly, like less than half than people have been up in space. What's interesting too is in America we often hear about like Scott Kelly, I think, who spent almost a day short of a year in space, but he's around the 9th longest person to stay in space or something like that. He's as long as American, but the Russians did it for long periods of time on Mir. So So definitely there's physiological problems with going to Mars. That was what some of my research was on. But muscle deterioration, bone density loss, those kinds of things.
You'd have to do the exercise program
You would have to do exercise regimes. You could possibly do a short radius or long radius artificial gravity, which means like spinning the spaceship to create artificial gravity. I don't know if we would do that or not. But you have to remember that we're going to Mars, which has 38% of Earth's gravity. So if you have some deconditioning of your muscle and bones, maybe it doesn't matter that much.
Right.
Going to Mars, right? Like you may have trouble returning to Earth right away. And definitely after a long stint in space, you have a lot of rehabilitation to be able to walk around on Earth and tolerate Earth's very high gravity.
Right.
But if you're going to Mars, it's a much lower gravity. So you're almost, in a sense, conditioning yourself for Mars as you go, because you're a species that is used to 1G, and you're going to a place that's 0.38G. So is that a problem?
What about cosmic rays?
Yeah, so cosmic rays, there's two types of radiation that are a concern. There's solar flares and cosmic rays. Solar flares can be shielded against pretty easily. Cosmic rays cannot be shielded against. But the dosage that you would take is no more than we have exposed astronauts to through multiple space flights in the space station, because the space station takes just as much cosmic rays effectively, except for half is blocked by Earth, right? So you double the time frame, and that's what you would take sort of in open space. So I don't think that's a particular concern for like a journey to Mars. Maybe for people living there for very long times, you can shield against that with regolith, like a meter or 2 meters of Martian soil, so to speak. But then obviously they have to go outside sometimes in a spacesuit to walk around, or what's the point of going? Right? But you'd have to monitor it. But the other thing is the recommended dosages were determined back in the 70s, I think, the astronaut recommended dosages, and they represent very, very low health risks. I mean, astronauts don't have that have flown and accumulated cosmic ray doses on the space station and Mir don't have dramatically higher rates of cancer or anything like that. We're talking about a few percent increase in the chance of a fatal cancer in your lifetime. So is that worth the first people going to another planet in sort of this exploratory phase? Yeah, I think so, right?
Well, I mean, people, when they're asked, say, yeah, I'd go. I mean, plenty of people would go.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. There'd be plenty of volunteers, I think.
Now, how long would it take to geoengineer Mars so that you'd have a breathable atmosphere?
Yeah. Again, so the thing about terraforming Mars, I don't like to comment on that.
That's it. Yeah.
But the thing about terraforming Mars is, I think it's possible, but we don't know. It's sort of an engineering project on an heretofore unprecedented scale.
What could go wrong?
It's not a scientific problem. It's an engineering problem. So the answer depends on what resources you throw at the problem. Like, how hard do you try? What dedication are we going to put into it, right? But if you have factories producing CFCs, which are pretty good, greenhouse gases, and you're basically trying to create a runaway greenhouse effect, a greenhouse effect to warm the planet, release the CO2 from the polar ice caps, which will also help start that process. And then as long as you can replace the atmosphere faster than it drains away into space. I mean, the main reason Mars lost its atmosphere is because it's smaller. So the gravity isn't enough to retain the molecules which float off into space, basically, or get stripped away by the sun.
Well, you can't change that.
We can't change that, but it's a pretty slow rate. I mean, of loss that happened over billions of years. So we may be able to replace it faster than it falls away, or we may be able to find ways to prevent the sun from stripping it away as fast. Yeah,
terraforming to me sounds like thousands of years to take, unless you had a Genesis device like in Star Trek 2 or 3, whichever. You just launch it and it just happens in 5 minutes.
So. Yeah, with what we know, given our current level of technology, it is extremely challenging to, and it could take hundreds or thousands of years, but technology improves and we don't know what breakthroughs will come about. But the other thing is, you don't need to terraform the whole planet. You can have domes that would terraform parts of it. That's paraterraforming. So you get localized areas that are basically terraformed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So has anyone at SpaceX given any thought to what kind of government you're going to have on Mars once you set up colonies?
Yeah, so that not officially.
Not officially,
something people talk about around the pub or something like that.
Right. Best discussed over adult beverages, I find, because it's politics, which is always polarizing. But yeah, I talked to Charles Cockell about this on the podcast, because he's thought a lot about this. I'm worried about a centralized, authority controlling the oxygen and the water and food and stuff like that. So his solution to that is just have multiple authorities, not one, but, just kind of like a democratic process or a sort of a democratic capitalist process where you have multiple producers of oxygen. And if one guy becomes a dictator, we can go to the other oxygen producer or something like that. I don't know. I mean, we're getting so far ahead of ourselves. We're a long ways from doing this. Presumably, but I never. when Elon gave that speech and made that little video, it's like, holy crap, we're actually thinking about this now. So this could happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think it is. But yeah, I think
maybe.
I solve problems when they come along, basically.
Yeah, one at a
time. Enough
time.
stuff to do before worrying about that.
All right, then from Mars, how do we get out to, like, how long would it take at current technology to get out to the moons of Jupiter or Saturn? That would take years, right?
Yeah, a few years. Yeah, for example, New Horizons to get out to Pluto took 9 years, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was one of the fastest objects. It was,
Right.
I think, the fastest launched object, which means many objects pick up speed as they change orbits. For example, the solar probe around the sun is the fastest object we've ever created, but it's only because it's doing that Klingon bird of prey slingshot around the sun.
Yeah. How fast is that going?
It's still less than 1% of the speed of light. It is it 476,000? I can't remember the figure in miles per hour.
Wow, that's fast.
But it's really fast. So, okay, orbital velocity is probably the best way to think about it. So in orbit, and for anything to stay in orbit, it has to go around 7 kilometers per second, which is literally 10 times faster than a bullet. That's about 10 times faster than a bullet travels. And this is probably 50 to 100 times that. It's substantially faster. So it's really fast.
And it would still take years to get out there to the moon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It would take years to get out to the moons of Jupiter. Jupiter might be 1 or 2 years. Most of the spacecraft we send out to Jupiter actually do slingshots around Venus, sometimes Earth, and I don't know if we've ever done one around Mars. Probably we've done it around Mars before. Venus is a good one because it's close and it's got substantial gravity.
Right. How fast is the Earth traveling around the sun? Try to remember.
I don't remember the figure
because we get a push if you go in the direction you want to go, right? Because you get the speed.
Yeah,
of the
sure. That gravity slingshot. It's sort of. I think it's around this on the same order of kilometers per second, but I don't remember the exact number.
Yeah, interesting. But to get to the nearest stars, we would need some kind of new propulsion system, right? You can't use chemistry.
Like Voyager, for example, is traveling outside our solar system. I mean, it depends on how you define the limits of the solar system, but there's different definitions of that. But basically, it's well past the outer planets.
Yeah.
And it would take 75,000 years to reach another star if it were traveling in the right direction, which it's not.
Right.
So, yeah, a long time. And the only way to feasibly do it within a human lifetime, if that's your criteria, is new forms of propulsion. Definitely, like antimatter or something like that. I mean, it's the best one that we can't even contemplate, but of course it's totally impractical. So I try to stick with things that are within the laws of physics. Don't break the laws of physics as we understand them.
Right.
But there's a big difference between something that is theoretically possible and actually practical. So like tachyons are particles that we think exist, that we think go back in time, maybe because they travel faster than light, maybe. But could you ever use that to power a starship or make it go through a wormhole or travel back in time or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
You can see a particle do it in a lab. Doesn't mean you could build a practical system that could transport a ship with crew.
Right.
So I think we don't even know how to make fusion power, which has a net return. But I think fusion power is sort of the most reasonable technology that we could envision powering a rocket that could take us to another star, and that's still like 50 to 100 years.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. Actually, the other one that we could probably build today is a fission bomb powered spaceship, which is the Orion. I think that's if we had to drop everything and get humanity to another star within, we had to leave within the next 10 years. That's, I think, the only technology we could actually use.
Right.
And even then, I don't think humanity would be unified enough to do anything like that. We'd probably just end up destroying ourselves, but in the scramble. But I think that's the only technology that's practical today, but not practical from a political perspective.
Right. Yeah, that was an actual project, Project Orion. You mentioned, you talk about that in the book. So explain how that works. You're exploding nuclear weapons at the back end of the spacecraft or the rocket.
And running shockwave. And the advantage is you're releasing energy from nuclear reactions rather than chemical reactions, which are 1,000 times more powerful. So you just liberate a lot more energy, and then you can ride the shockwave.
Yeah. But of course, the shock wave is moving out in a sphere, right? So you're only getting one portion of it.
Correct. Yep. You have a big pusher plate. You might get, I don't know, 20% or something like that of the energy.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
You want to take 1,000 nuclear weapons as pellets, as propellant into space?
I mean, it is, those
perfectly reasonable.
Those protesters show up at the Florida launch site with, even when there's just like a microscope amount of plutonium in a spacecraft. Yeah, they get all worried about that. But of course, part of the limitation is we have no idea what, in 1,000 years people will be able to do, still within the laws of physics. I mean, if you told Archimedes or somebody, or even Columbus, the moon right there, here's what's going to happen, they'd be like, are you out of your mind? There's no way we could do that.
Sort of. So I am mixed on this. I mostly agree with you. However, if you asked Leonardo da Vinci how to build an airplane, he would have said, "Yeah, here's the plan."
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, right.
Or even Lucian, this Roman writer from 2,000 years ago, Lucian of Samosat, wrote of ships traveling to the moon. Actually, Oliver Cromwell's stepbrother actually also came up with a plan to send humans to the moon. Back in the 1600s. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, well, you might be right. Well, so where is that person today that tells us how to do it?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, Einstein kind of spoiled the party to some extent by setting these limitations on traveling faster than light. And I don't think anyone has come up with a convincing answer of why he's wrong.
Right.
So, and in the past, we didn't know how to do these things. Like Leonardo da Vinci, his airfoils were all wrong. They were completely based on birds, and he didn't have a method to power his airplane. Right. So it relied on the internal combustion engine until we could actually have powered flight. But it didn't break any laws of physics that we knew about. Right. So to some extent, I think you're right. Like the Greeks would have imagined flying as something that a god would do and is not possible for humans. But actually, they wrote about that too, Icarus and Daedalus. All you need is wings and you can flap them. And if the wings are big enough and the power source is strong enough, then you should be able to fly. Yeah, and that's true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Unless you could expand space itself, which can then move faster than the speed of light to get you there.
Correct. Yeah, and that's something we know is a property of the universe, that space expands and contracts. So things are, the observable universe is around 80, I think, billion light years wide. Yeah. But it has been only around for 13 something billion years. So it has expanded at faster than the speed of light. But it's not because it's expanding from a central source. It's expanding like a bunch of soap bubbles. All kind of space itself is expanding all over the place. So nothing actually broke the speed of light, but yet it expanded faster than the speed of light. So, so there's something there, maybe.
Yeah. So light, just to drill down on that for a second, because it's so counterintuitive. The light itself is moving within the space that itself is expanding faster than speed of light. So the speed of light is not violated because it's just doing what it does.
Absolutely. Yep. Exactly. So it doesn't break any laws of physics. Could you somehow use that to expand space to travel to other stars? That's the Alcubierre device or drive that was, I think, proposed in the 90s, but it's basically what Star Trek has always done with warp drives.
Right.
It's unclear if that's even theoretically possible. It's kind of borderline theoretically possible.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's practical. As I say, that's like a long way from being a practical transportation mechanism. So even if you could somehow bend space and move a particle, how could you build a system that would have a ship do that and survive?
Right.
That's a big difference. Right.
So I think Lawrence Krauss did the calculations in his Physics of Star Trek book. It'd be like more energy than humans have consumed in all of our species' time.
Oh,
it's just not even feasible.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Well,
actually, I bet more energy hits the planet from the sun than we've ever consumed in the history of humanity.
Okay.
Because I know that civilization uses about the same amount of energy as the energy from the sun that hits our planet in 1 hour. Something.
Right.
Oh no, that's in a year. But obviously our technology has increased such exponentially that back in the day we could just basically forget about that.
Yeah.
It's not right? So
well,
if
that
you look
gets
at
us back to the Fermi paradox. We even if they're not exploring, we should still see solar panels in orbit around planets, something like that, like a Dyson sphere, that kind of thing. And
maybe, but we've only even our telescopes have surveyed just a few percent of our own galaxy. So space is big. People don't really get how big space is.
Right.
Douglas Adams, space is big, but it's absolutely enormous. But even so, the other thing is radio signals decay with distance to the square. So we'd have difficulty detecting ourselves at a distance of more than a light year or two.
Right.
So they'd have to have very advanced transmitters that were somehow accidentally leaking into space. I mean, it's definitely not a given that an alien communication system would be detectable from Earth. So they'd have to want to be detected. They'd have to accidentally leave some very high-powered radio devices that were leaking into space in all directions, because radio is actually not omnidirectional either. So they'd have to be pointing at us,
right.
or just kind of have a massive amount of energy just going off, right? So it's definitely not clear from the lack of radio signals that implies the lack of intelligent civilizations.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We've got a long search ahead of us. Do you know that Tabby star example? That a woman, an astronomer named Tabby, I forget her last name, and it has a technical name, but it looks like it's either a swarm of planets or debris or whatever, because it's blocking like 20% of the light every so many hours or days or whatever it is. And so some speculation has been it's something like a Dyson sphere, or yeah. I don't know if you follow that story. Last I heard is they don't know what it is.
Yeah, these things happen all the time. Well, not all the time, but I've heard multiple reports. Oh, we may have found a Dyson sphere. Well, okay.
really what it is the problem of anomalies in science, because there's always anomalies in all fields. This is back to the alternative archaeology. Well, what I found this little thing here. What does it mean? I don't know. Okay, in that case, I'm going to write a whole theory about what I think it means.
Exactly. We don't know what it is, therefore aliens.
Therefore aliens, exactly, yeah. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. I know. I've seen so many of those shows, I can't stand watching them anymore.
I've never watched one, I have to confess.
Oh my God, it's just endless. I mean, that's the meme. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. But that is what they say every time. It's crazy.
I have trouble wrapping my head around the fact that these shows are credible to people. I don't know. I can't even. It's honestly, I have this trouble with all kinds of skeptical things. I'm almost. Yeah. I have trouble believing that other people aren't skeptical.
Yeah, I know. I agree, and I publish a magazine called Skeptic.
Yeah.
Well, since you think about these big issues, let me just hit you with the rapid fire ones. Are we living in a matrix? What is your thoughts on that?
Matrix? No, probably. You mean like a simulation?
A simulation, yeah.
I kind of think my feeling is no, but my intellectual says it's highly probable, actually. So I don't know. 50-50.
50-50. Well, that's how the argument begins. What are the chances that, we're at the end of the timeline, we're in the middle, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if we're average in the middle, then the chance, and we're going to soon be able to make a virtual reality, so somebody will, and there you go.
Totally. Nesting doll of universes, and therefore the balance of probability says that we're in a simulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But I don't know. I mean, so the thing is also, does it matter? I mean, what are you going to do differently with your life?
Nothing. There was actually a good Star Trek Next Generation episode I hadn't seen. I saw the other night when I couldn't fall asleep, and I'm just, now there's so many options to watch stuff on Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, and I subscribe to them all. I could just sit there all day and night watching documentaries. Maybe that's what the aliens are doing. They all got free streaming videos.
Exactly. Yes, this is it. This is the Fermi's paradox. They're all watching Netflix.
Anyway, in the simulation there, the holodeck, where Picard and Data like to play with Sherlock Holmes and so on. Anyway, Moriarty, the evil arch evil guy, he exits the holodeck and he's standing there in the hallway, and they're going, that's impossible. You can't exist in the real world. And so the rest of the episode is trying to figure out what happened. And what happened was he redesigned the holodeck to include the rest of the Enterprise. So it only looked like he was exiting the holodeck that itself was a part of the holodeck. It was
Yes,
it was
I
very
remember
clever.
that's really good. Yeah,
Yeah, that was pretty good because that's like 1992, 93, before this whole, before the Matrix and before everybody was talking about, are we living in a simulation? Because the episode ends where Picard has this little box and he says, that's where Moriarty is. And maybe we're all just in a box like this.
Wow.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
I was impressed. With the writers are, some of these science fiction writers are really clever. I wish I had that kind of imagination to then marry the science that we know and then imagine going beyond that in some reasonable way. The people that do that they're really, really clever. So what's next? What are you going to do for your next external project?
Not really sure. I do have some other ideas. I was thinking about sort of an evolution of civilization kind of argument about how civilization works like natural selection, how we progress when we take ideas and then reject the ones that don't work and accept the ones that do. And
I like that.
Maybe that's too optimistic that we use rational minds to actually make decisions like this. But even accidentally with agriculture, I mean, there's so many things that are like that, but sort of a parallel. I think there is a strong parallel there.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's like a Noah Harari type big picture book. I love those kind of books. I can't get enough of them. I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah, you could wrap into there the Kardashian of civilization types, and then talk about how we can become a type 1 civilization, a type 2 civilization, and so on. All speculation, but it's big fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, too. All right. Well, when you get a date on when we're going to colonize Mars, let me know, and we'll have you back on the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.